there's so many different ways that teams can get their eyes on guys that are veterans that have been through the league already, like Derek Favors, who just signed a 10-day here actually in the few minutes where we were preparing to jump on. Guys like PJ Dozier, who had an injury, but they're still really young and looking for an opportunity to get back on an NBA roster. Plenty of other guys that just want opportunities. And these 10-day contracts are unique because they can't be signed until January 5th. So before we hit the new year, you can't sign 10-day contracts whatsoever. And as the name states, they're 10 days in length or 3 games, whichever period of time is longer. But here's the other thing about 10 days. Once you hit the part in the NBA calendar to where a 10-day could take you past the last regular season game, that's when you're prohibited from using them. So let's say, for instance, you're the Denver Nuggets. It seems like a perfect example. And you hit game number 80 and you have not signed a 10-day contract, or your 10-day contracts have expired. You are no longer able to sign another one because, as the name states, 10 days or 3 games. The 3 games could take you past the game 82, which would be the end of the season. So at that point, you're no longer able to sign contracts. And it's also worth mentioning that, if you find a player that you really like, you can give them a 10-day. Let's say they ball out. Let's say they average 30 points a game. I don't know. That's probably not going to happen, but just for the case of this example, that'd be crazy, right? If that happened, that's an instant guaranteed contract. You give him a second one. You say, cool, I like this guy. I want to give him another opportunity. That's great. After the second one, your hands are kind of tied a little bit because you either have to let the player go back into free agency, or you have to sign them to a contract for the rest of the season. So at that point, you have to make a decision. So there's a lot of different nuances in this 10-day contract. I just covered a few of them. But on your end, Colin, what do you see as far as the benefits of the 10-day contract? And are there any other little nuances of this role, this way to sign players that we should know about?
Yeah, just a couple of things. Like you said, we're hitting the time in the season when some key dates pop up. Obviously, we talked about the December 15th when a lot of the players who were signed in the offseason are now available for trades. And now with the January 5th, we have 10-day contract availability. And with that, what we had in mid-December was what's called the G League Showcase, where they have in Vegas, they have all the league executives and decision makers go out there, and media members. Essentially, it's not open to the public. It's aired on ESPN, but it's not open to the fans live. They play several games over the span of a week or 10 days, I believe. And essentially, it's to showcase all the players in the G League in anticipation that on January 5th, these 10-day contracts are going to open up, injuries are going to occur, and roster spots are going to start opening up as well. And we'll talk about in this podcast the waiver of non-guaranteed contracts as well. So roster spots are going to start opening up. But what's interesting here is with the G League, unlike some other sports, a lot of the players on the G League rosters can be signed by other teams. And that's what's interesting. So if a player is on a G League, Dallas Mavericks G League affiliate, as long as he's not signed to a 2-way contract or just a standard NBA contract, any other team can pick him up for a 10-day contract or a 2-way contract, or eventually convert him into an NBA contract. Mm-hmm. So that's why they have these G League showcases, so that can happen. And there, a few of these guys who have been on the showcase and performed really well end up signing these 10-day contracts, and then end up signing rest of the season contracts. And then, who knows where it goes from there. Of course, you have some success stories for these guys in the G League who traveled around, who got poached here and there, went back and forth. Gary Payton, the second, is the most recent one who just won a ring. Alex Caruso is another one. So it's always really important that these guys are being scouted by all the teams, because you can go out and poach any of these guys who aren't signed to a 2-way contract or an NBA contract.
Exactly. Those are great points to make about this contract and who is eligible to be signed. Mm-hmm. It's definitely unique in how you can quote unquote poach guys. There's been a few times where I've gone on Heat Twitter, and there's a guy we're all looking at. We're like, this dude is balling out in the G League. He's having a great campaign so far. Then all of a sudden, here comes the Spurs. They just
right.
stuff them right under their noses. So that's permitted. They're not affiliated with any specific team.
Yep.
Teams do have their G League affiliates, but as you said, if they're not on a two-way, they're not bound to that team, so someone else can come and pick them up. Now, it's also worth mentioning that these two contracts types that we're mentioning, the two-way and the 10-day, cannot be combined. So they're
Mhm.
mutually exclusive. If you sign someone into a two-way, they can't be on a 10-day, and vice versa, just because of the nature of the contract. If someone's under a two-way contract, they can go between the NBA and the G League affiliate. I think they can spend up to, I think it's 45 days with the NBA, actual NBA team. Um, during the season. And a prime candidate for that guy that I think of is Orlando Robinson, who's currently on a two-way from Miami. And I'm just thinking, I'm like, I know they want to sign this dude to a rest of season contract because he's been having great minutes with Bam being injured, Dwayne Dedman, a shell of himself. I mean, his on-off numbers are horrendous. Whenever he comes in the game, the team just hemorrhages points. So there's definitely great uses for a two-way and a 10-day. There's times to use them, but just wanted to point out that they can't be combined in any way. They have to be done. You pick one, you pick the other. But I do love how they offer great opportunities. And the 10-day is a lot of
Yeah.
pressure because you only get 10 days or 3 games. But Derek Favors is going to come in for the Hawks, who are having injury issues of their own, going to get a great opportunity. And then PJ Dozier, who I'd forgot about for a while because he's been out with an ACL tear, he just got picked up by the Kings for a 10-day contract. And during his most recent campaign, which was the 2020-21 season, he averaged about 7.7 points on about 41% from the field, 31% from three-point line. But he's a defensive specialist.
Yeah.
And we know that there are a lot of teams like the Kings. And that's why I think they picked him up, is because of his defensive prowess on that end of the floor. So I can't wait to see how these guys perform with that. Very small window of opportunity, but it is an opportunity nonetheless.
Yeah, and that's what's great about it. And just to go back on the two-way contracts as well, teams are limited to two-way contracts, and they get 2 additional roster spots on the active list for those two-way contracts. Whereas the
Right.
10-day contracts, they go on your active list for the 15 max roster spots, and then the 2 additional to make it 17 are only for those two-way contracts.
That's a good point to make.
Mhm.
It's definitely nice to have those two ways that are not bound to that 15 player backs on your team, because like we keep going back to injuries and even just rest days for these players. It's just kind of the nature of the game we're in today. 10 days or two ways didn't exist back in the 90s, early
Right.
2000s, things like that. But I feel like there wasn't as much of a need for them back then because you didn't have so much of a shuffle between guys going in and out of the lineup. If you look back to guys like, let's just say, the John Stocktons of the world and the Michael Jordans, the Gary Paytons, I mean, these guys played probably at least 72, 75 games every
Right.
season. So there wasn't as much of a need for you to go pick up guys to come in and take their place when they're sitting out. John Morant is a guy that he doesn't really miss huge chunks of a season. He doesn't have like injuries like an ACL tear, things like that. But he's going to miss a game here, a game there, a game here. So it's nice for teams to be able to bring in guys to kind of take their place, uh, get into some of those empty spots left over by those players that do miss games. So I think in today's NBA specifically, 10 days and two ways are especially effective and very useful just because of the way guys are in and out from one day to the next. You don't know who's going to be playing. You don't know if you're going to be the Heat going on national TV right about now, playing the Thunder, missing 4 starters.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say, look at all the injuries they have. I mean, they
Yeah,
need they need those 10-day contracts, and it's
seriously,
great too because it's a great conduit to the G League and to veteran players, like you said, PJ Dozier trying to get back into the league. It helps out both sides, the veteran players and these guys who have been trying to work their way into the league. For a year or two, who've been bouncing around. So
for sure.
both the 2 ways and the 10 days are a way to showcase your talent when you get that chance.